Our opening words this morning come to us from our Chinook in the Pacific Northwest. It's a blessing. We call upon our earth, our planet home, with its beautiful depths and soaring heights, its vitality and abundance of life. And together we ask it that it teach us and show us the way. We call upon the mountains, the Cascades and the Olympics, the high green valleys and meadows filled with wildflowers, the snows that never melt, the summits of intense silence, and we ask that they teach us and show us the way. We call upon the waters that rim the earth, horizon to horizon, that flow in our rivers and streams, that fall upon our gardens and fields. And we ask that they teach us and show us the way. We call upon the land which grows our food, the nurturing soil, the fertile fields, the abundant gardens and orchards. We ask that they teach us and show us the way. We call upon the forests, the great trees reaching strongly to the sky, with earth in their roots and the heavens in their branches, the fir and the pine and the cedar. And we ask them to teach us and show us the way. We call upon the creatures of the fields and forests and the seas, our brothers and sisters, the wolves and deer, the eagle and dove, the great whales and the dolphin, the beautiful orca and salmon who share our Northwest home. And we ask them to teach us and show us the way. We call upon all those who have lived on this earth, our ancestors and our friends, who dreamed the best for future generations and upon whose lives our lives are built. And with thanksgiving, we call upon them to teach us and show us the way. And lastly, we call upon all that we hold most sacred, the presence and power of the great spirit of love and truth, which flows through all the universe, to be with us, to teach us and show us the way. And now if you'll get your chalice or candle or whatever means of making a flame that you have, and join me together in the words of our chalice lighting. We light our flaming chalice to illuminate the world we seek. And in the search for truth, may we be just. In the search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace. May it be so. So it's time to join together again in a time of meditation and reflection. And wherever we are, whether it's at our home, maybe in a studio or a kitchen, or a sofa in our living room, I would invite you to relax. To be comfortable. And to take a couple of long, slow, deep breaths. And as you exhale, let the cares, stresses of this difficult time leave your body. Let your muscles relax. Let some of that stress, that care, roll down into the waiting arms of Mother Earth. And find that still place within yourself. That refuge that I hope is available to all of us, each of us, anytime we need it. And in that still space, I offer these words, a couple of short pieces from Wendell Berry. They're just little short meditations on community. In his short story, The Wild Birds, the character Burley Coulter says, the way we are members of each other. All of us, everything. The difference ain't in who is a member and who is not, but in who knows it and who don't. And Wendell, in another of his writings, says, I believe that community, in the fullest sense, a place and all its creatures, and the smallest unit of health, is the smallest unit of health. And to speak of the health of an isolated individual is a contradiction in terms. So I invite us all to sit with those thoughts for a few moments. Thank you. So for those of you who may not know, I'm a brat, an Army brat. I grew up on Army bases in Europe and the US in the 1950s and 1960s. And it's a very different world than that inhabited by the average American. It's got its own culture, its own customs. And it's funny what you remember from childhood. My father was an officer. And at that time, if you were an officer, you and your family went to church on Sundays. And it was expected to be back then, not for religious reason necessarily, but unspoken social ones. We went to what I would like to call now generic Protestant services. And after all these years, I honestly can say I don't remember a word of any sermon or any Bible verse or the words to any hymns except a few Christmas carols. But I do remember the hard wooden pews and the weird cardboardy flavorless flavor of the communion wafers that kind of sort of melted in your mouth and stuck to your tongue, and the odd sour taste of the grape juice used instead of wine. So for a restless boy, communion was kind of exciting. It was a break from regular old boring Sundays. And I don't remember it happening very often, probably because we moved from base to base a lot. And Protestant services were led by ministers from a variety of denominations who served folks from a variety of denominations, all of whom had slightly differing theological stances on the subject. But I have this image of the wafers and the wine being passed out, the juice being passed out, and everyone waiting to eat and drink together. Now, I think my mother may have gently slapped my hand a time or two to keep me from jumping the gun and gobbling the wafer down. Hey, I was bored and hungry. But we said the words together. We ate the wafers together. We drank the juice together. And for a moment, we were one with the divine as we received the memory and the presence of Christ together. Not that I really understood that at the time, being a child. I think that many of us, when we hear the word communion, we understand it as a Christian practice. But communion can be understood in other ways than in the Christian sense. It can be understood as an act of sharing, but more often as the experience of intimate fellowship or rapport with something or each other. Ritual and worship and prayer can give us that experience without us necessarily believing in a deity, gods or goddesses. One of my favorite examples is the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address. This is an invocation that's done to open and close major meetings or when anything important is done. It's also a great way to start and end your day. And if you haven't read it or said it, I highly recommend you do. And it's a long invocation. There are some 18 verses. And the first one is for the people. And it goes, "Today we have gathered and we see that the cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now we bring our minds together as one, as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. Now our minds are one." And there are verses for the earth mother, the waters, the fish, the plants, the animals, the trees, the birds, the four winds, the thunders, the sun, grandmother moon, the stars, the wisdom keepers, the creator. And each verse ends with the words, "Now our minds are one." The address closes with this verse, "We have now arrived at the place where we end our words. Of all the things we have named, it was not our intention to leave anything out. If something was forgotten, we leave it to each individual to send such greetings and thanks in their own way. Now our minds are one." And we have to notice that many of the minds are not human or even animal. The whole address is the practice of establishing rapport, communion with something larger, with the natural world, and placing human beings in right relationship in that world. Now our minds are one. This is also communion. Communion opens us up to other viewpoints, and it's critical to the spiritual practice of community. And the spiritual practice of community is foundational to our faith. We use the term beloved community a lot, but I wonder sometimes how we understand that and how that understanding informs how we practice it. As Joe noted earlier, the words communion and community share the same roots. In Latin, it's communis, common, also meaning mutual participation. Communion can also mean an association or fellowship, as in the Anglican communion. And the word communication comes from the same roots, and you can't have community without communication, right? Last month, I shared how I think blessing the world takes us into communion and into the holistic way that the right brain pays attention to the world. And as I noted then, we also need the left brain orientation, which I think for us is covenant. But the right brain needs to guide the left. Now, I think people sometimes misunderstand or misuse communion as some state of fuzzy, woo-woo, undifferentiated oneness. But on the contrary, my understanding is that communion requires a state of alertness, something like a flow state, a heightened awareness where our singular consciousness isn't getting in the way of our knowing and understanding. So many of our current predicaments are what we call wicked problems. A wicked problem is a social or cultural problem that's difficult or sometimes impossible to solve, usually because of its complex and interconnected nature. Racism is just one example. Climate change is another. Or perhaps we're simply caught in a dilemma between two not so great choices that generate not so great outcomes, and we have to choose between what we guess is the lesser of two evils. But when we're in a flow state of multiple viewpoints, solutions can present themselves. Not always, but they can. And they arise from the collective field of awareness without us giving up our individuality and autonomy. Now, I like to think of this as knowing the world, understanding the world with the eyes of a bee. A bee's eyes are multifaceted, each facet giving its own incomplete view of the world. But together, they give the bee a more complete view of the world, a view that allows it to navigate and survive. The thing about communion is that we can't be selective about the viewpoints we choose to see with or listen to. That disrupts this holistic orientation, drops us out of communion. No singular viewpoint can be allowed to dominate, or we find ourselves back slicing and dicing the world and trying to write prescriptions. Back to trying to fix the world by fixing details. And fixing the world that way literally means fixing it in time and place, trying to make it static and unchanging. And I think that's perhaps the biggest mistake of all. As a culture, I believe we've ignored communion at great cost. Communion can be as simple as a shared sense of the common good, or as complex as a sense of cosmic unity. I think there's a lot to Ian McGilchrist's claim that left brain thinking has come at the expense of the bigger picture. And it's now reached a point where it's seriously distorting our lives and our thought and our societies. And so the question then becomes one of trying to overcome those distortions and restore balance, to have the bigger picture guide us, to see like bees not being attached to only one viewpoint, usually ours, and to quit struggling over whose view is going to rule. I think it's possible. I think we're going to have to in order to navigate and survive. We face wicked problems. It probably won't be easy, but you never know. It will take some humility to do so, but it could surprise us, and it could be easy if we try. And we must always start where we are. And I believe that communion gives us the best place to start from as individuals and as communities. May it be so.
Thank you, Munro. It's this time of the service where we talk about the sharing of responsibility. And normally when we would be meeting in person, we would pass the basket around and take up a collection. But we're not able to do this. We can do it virtually. But I just want to, as the treasurer of this community, want to just thank everyone for their faithfulness in their giving, their generosity, and not just in the giving of financial gifts, but also of their talents, their time, and their skills. And it's very, very much appreciated. We could not be the community that we are without everyone's participation in whatever way they can participate. I just wanted to also remind everyone, I forgot to say it during the announcements, that please check when the weekly email comes from Rachel. Make sure to look at it. It has a lot of up-to-date announcements and things going on. We also have the availability of the February newsletter, as well as the newsletter archives. And if you don't receive that and you would like to, please let Rachel know, and her email is also on the in the order of service. So I'm going to turn it back over to Munro for closing words, extinguishing the chalice, the postlude, and benediction. Munro.
Thank you, Joe. To share some words modified from St. Thomas More. The things, Spirit of life, that we pray for, give us the grace to labor for. We're in a time of great change. And I think one of the best things we can do is try things. Be easy on ourselves. We're human. We're going to stumble. We're going to fall. We're going to pick ourselves back up and try again. We may say harsh words. We may be irritable because we're under a lot of stress. And again, in community, we continue on. We forgive each other. We try to come back into communion because that's what we do. That's our practice. So let's join together in the words of extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you again, Martha. It's lovely to how clear the sound comes through. Just one of these miracles of technology. It's amazing. Interesting times we live in. You know, one of the great powers that human beings have is the power of imagination. We can imagine things in our heads and feel them in our bodies and our hands. And so I invite you now to reach out and hold hands with whoever's next to you on the screen. And feel their hands in yours. And feel us gathered together in a circle. May love and skill guide our hands. May love and courage fill our hearts. May love and wisdom light our minds. May love flow through us and walk among us as we live our lives and be in communion together. Amen, amen, shalom, and blessed be. May it be so. Go in peace. Thank you for coming.